sit next. It's a good opportunity for me to introduce Teddy Downy, who is the founder and the chief editor of Capital Forum, a hugely respected publication. It will come on its own in DC, focusing mostly on antitrust, but more broadly. He's generously supported this conference for 2 years now, so I'm super happy with Teddy, who is a friend, and his team, who've been doing a fantastic job all day, tweeting and repeating content. So it's a great thing to be here together. Capital Forum, I should also say, just expanded in Europe, hiring one of the big names of the Brussels market, Javier Espinosa, who has come from the FT. So again, this is a great piece of news. So what we're going to do for this last 20 minutes, and Teddy will start and I'll just sort of breathe and then join in, is to have the fantastic opportunity to hear from Lina, who of course cannot be here in person, but I think I don't exaggerate when I say, and this is witness to the fact that at 6 o'clock we still have a full room, Lina Khan is a brand. Lina Khan is a legend. There is such incredible affection, as well as huge respect and admiration for Lina in Europe, that I really cannot speak more highly to what she has achieved, to what she has done. I think we are all awed by the mountain of achievement that she has really put in place in 4 short years at the Federal Trade Commission as chair. She's just now, tomorrow, leaving the Federal Trade Commission formally. But I think it is important to celebrate what Lina achieved. She has multiple scars, to pick up the language that Catherine used this morning. The scars are very many because she's been a favored target of many, from Wall Street to the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post. She has attracted a level of hostility in trying to deliver her duties that is unimaginable. I cannot think of anyone who attracted that level of opprobrium and hostility. And that is, it's explained because, of course, she goes against powerful interests. That has been her whole period. I will stop doing hagiographic Lina celebration because everyone is tired to death of hearing from me. So if we have Lina online, maybe we could put her on screen. And Lina, wonderful. You have a full room at 6 o'clock in the evening in Brussels. We are so delighted to see you. So I will hand over to Teddy for a moment for the first question. We are going to play this as a conversation. But just to tell you what I've been saying is you really command a level of affection and respect in Europe, which is enormous. So everyone is here to listen and hear from you. Okay, Teddy, go ahead.
Thank you, Cristina. And I just want to thank Cristina for doing this conference. This is the second year we've sponsored it. I'm so grateful to partner with you. It was an incredible conversation. I'm so happy to ask Lina some questions momentarily. But I just want to take a moment to reflect on what Cristina did today. I mean, it was her passion, her curiosity, her intellect makes this event special. And I think, and I actually believe this is a historically important event. We're going to remember this for years to come. And this is just an incredibly important debate that you've put together. And it's because of all those things I mentioned, and in particular, your passion. And I saw that in the last panel. I see it right now. And I'm excited to try to live up to that and ask Chair Khan the first question here. There was a lot of, thank you so much for doing this, Chair Khan.
Hey, everybody. So good to get to be with you all virtually.
And so there was a lot of talk today, and there was some skepticism from some of the Europeans here who were questioning the economic benefit of strong competition policy. And you've had a number of incredible successes. You've reinvigorated merger enforcement. You put out new guidelines. You reinvigorated price discrimination law. With the DOJ, you've reinvigorated monopolization law. And you've gotten to see over the years the results of doing that. And I was hoping you might be able to share some of the real world results, benefits, and reactions from the business community and the economy.
Well, thanks so much. And let me just also echo Teddy's acknowledgement of just the enormous work that Cristina puts into these events. And year after year, it just ends up being such a seminal moment to be driving forward the conversation. So thank you, Cristina, for all that you contribute to the important conversations you're hosting. So, the way I look at it is just to step back. I think what you saw over the last 4 years at the FTC, but really in a variety of corners of the administration, was a concerted and focused effort to move on from an approach that had been failing the American people. The past approach had been in place more or less for around 40 years, so it's not something that could be shed overnight. But if you had asked me 4 years ago, did I think that we would be able to achieve as much as we did in such a short period of time? My answer would overwhelmingly have been no. And of course, I wish we had more time, but it's also been enormously gratifying to know that the genie is out of the bottle. And there are going to be people who want to turn back the clock, but I think practically it'll be quite difficult to do. There are a lot of different ways to try to assess the impact of what the agency has been able to do. Teddy, you asked about, what are some of the material, concrete, tangible effects on people's lives? I think on the merger enforcement front, you see that in all sorts of sectors. One of our most recent wins was blocking the proposed merger between Kroger and Albertsons, which would have been the largest grocery merger in U.S. history. And this is one that really galvanized people across the country. I was invited to various listening sessions by state attorneys generals in places like Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and you had dozens and sometimes even hundreds of people come and say, look, I remember the last time that the FTC allowed a big grocery merger to go through, and it meant layoffs. It meant, stores shutting down. There are still grocery deserts as a result of those deals. And so there was much more of a visceral appreciation of how these arcane decisions that enforcers are making about which mergers are legal or illegal have an enormously consequential effect on people's day-to-day lives. We'd also at the FTC prioritized in particular healthcare markets, because we know these are not discretionary, and that all too often Americans are paying too much for service that is actually worse comparatively than in other countries that are paying much less. And we took a holistic approach here. So we looked at drug prices. We looked at market consolidation in areas like hospitals. We looked at, what is afflicting independent pharmacies and why are we seeing them being driven out of business? And across all of these fronts, we have major work streams in place. We also took action outside of the lawsuit context. And so we challenged some of these patenting tricks that big pharma companies had pursuing, resulting in them agreeing to cut down the costs for asthma inhalers down to $35 from hundreds of dollars. So there are a lot of different material ways that people's lives are now better because of the work that the FTC has been doing these last few years. And I think it sets a really strong foundation for future leaders to be building on.
And in those people who benefit, I've listened to a lot of the open meetings that you've had. You've had a lot of small businesses come by. What's the reaction from them to the work that you've done? There was a lot of talk today about new business formation. What are the types of things that you see from your work that have encouraged small businesses, new business formation, or even, I remember, I think you blocked NVIDIA, was that VMware? No. NVIDIA ARM, and then they've been obviously super successful since then. So, would love to just get a little bit of a taste of the business community's reaction to the work that you've done.
You're right that one thing I really prioritized was making sure that we were hearing from all corners of the business community, and not just the most, well-heeled entities that know how to navigate DC and hire, expensive law firms. And so we did that through our open commission meetings, through doing trips across the country. And I think, first of all, we encountered some, candidly, skepticism. I think especially among the small and independent business community, there has been some disillusionment over decades about the role of government. And so there definitely has been just a basic trust deficit that had emerged. And I think this goes to the deeper, more fundamental challenge that enforcers and policymakers face, which is, you can be on the cusp of a real legitimacy crisis if you're not actually moving past some of the failed models and the failed approaches. So I think initially, there has been skepticism and honestly just surprise that people from Washington, D.C. were traveling to, Ames, Iowa, or even Kansas City and just listening to what independent businesses were facing in their day-to-day. You're right that some of the actions that we've taken have already led to benefits for the independent business and startup and founder community in particular. You mentioned the NVIDIA ARM merger. That was a deal that the FTC sought to block because we worried that allowing kind of a agnostic platform to be acquired by NVIDIA would really undermine innovation in next generation technologies. And sometimes with merger enforcement, it's difficult to anticipate what the counterfactual will be. But I think the NVIDIA ARM example is just a fantastic one of how blocking this deal really enabled each of these firms to continue to be wildly successful. And there's reporting suggesting that ARM may actually now consider directly competing with NVIDIA. One of the actions we filed a few weeks ago was a lawsuit taking on illegal repair restrictions by John Deere, which really inhibit the ability of farmers to get affordable, timely repairs. We've heard a lot of concern from independent grocers over the years about price discrimination that is resulting in them being squeezed out. Our revival of the Robinson-Patman Act, I hope, can be one of these watershed moments whereas firms for decades have been saying, well, we can ignore entirely that whole statute because nobody's enforcing it, that now the notice has gone out that actually firms are going to have to abide by the law.
Can I jump in, perhaps? And Lina, I want to just bring the perspective from Europe, of course. You said at the beginning that, of course, anyone asked you 4 years ago if you could anticipate how much you were going to be able to go through. There was, at the time, no sense that you would be able to do as much as you did. But what you have driven through an incredible agenda at incredible speed in a short period of time with an incredible amount of purpose and determination, which is reflected in the results. And from a European perspective, watching this has been elating and bewildering in some dimension because you and Jonathan, of course, I should also mention Jonathan at the DOJ, but really there's been a real shift in posture, which was really very much about putting people at the center, small businesses, what are the pain points, an approach that in Europe feels novel because European regulator, and we had some very great people this morning, and at the national level they do great things, but in Brussels there is very much a sense that things are sort of looked down from the top of a tower and nobody ever meets a citizen or thinks very much about what the pain points are, what is this that should drive the agenda. A long-winded way to say you can maybe expand further on the vision that actually drove the agenda and allowed you to go through so much.
There were a few key pillars or principles, you might call them, that kind of animated the overall agenda. One was wanting to make sure at the very least we were using all of the tools that we've been given. Right? I mean, Congress has given the FTC just a remarkable array of authorities and tools. And over the decades, a whole swath of them had just become dormant. And so we first of all came in and did a kind of a full accounting of and canvassing of what are all the authorities that we have here and how do we make sure we're making best use of them. A second core principle was wanting to make sure that we were tackling what are just the biggest pain points that people are facing in their day-to-day lives. And so when we're talking about antitrust and competition, a lot of the major harm ends up being done by some of the major players. And so making sure we were focusing appropriately on some of the dominant entities, on some of the dominant gatekeepers whose illegal behaviors can just have enormous consequences for people. We also just made sure, as you noted, that we were listening to regular people. And I think, that's in part just good government. As public servants, we kind of owe it to people to listen to them. But I think it goes to this more fundamental question of how do we know what we know about markets and the economy, right? And if you just use that type of top-down approach, I think there is serious danger of falling in all sorts of persistent blind spots and not fully grasping what's really happening in the full story. I think the other thing that really gave us insight into is just all of these ways that the daily indignities of being a consumer can accumulate to create a deep sense of frustration and coercion. And this is where our consumer protection work comes in as well. So, the subscription traps that mean that you have to call somebody or go in person just to exit a subscription, the junk fees work that Rohit Chopra helped pioneer, in all sorts of aspects of our work. The FTC is lucky to, in some ways, have direct insight into the micro level, right? Sometimes economists and policymakers are always looking at the macro indicators to understand what is the health of the economy. But the FTC is uniquely positioned because we just understand much more the more day-to-day challenges that people are facing through some of these, ordinary transactions that can still feel so painful, but really shouldn't be.
There was a lot of talk today about growth at any cost here, and a lot of your work ends up helping. I think at least from the reporting that we've done, honest businesses. It focuses on fair competition. How do you think about how the FTC used both their antitrust and consumer protection authority to make sure that it was honest businesses that ostensibly aren't exploiting their workers or exploiting consumers to thrive and grow?
So the FTC in particular, because it has both the consumer protection and competition mandate, is pretty uniquely positioned to be helping lay out what are the fair versus unfair methods of competing. And we certainly have seen, unfortunately, instances in which consumer protection violations can be pursued to chase scale, right? So rampant privacy violations where companies are gobbling up people's data to chase the network effects and data feedback loops. And then by the time enforcers recognize those as privacy violations, the firms are already enjoying the fruits of that illegal conduct in the form of, dominant platforms and monopoly positions. And so we try to really be focused on understanding what are those feedback loops between consumer protection violations and potential competition violations. And then also, especially when you have these technological inflection points, there can always be a risk that firms will identify innovative ways to be violating the law, but try to explain that is just a new technology or some new innovation. And so we were very clear with AI, for example, that there's no AI exemption from the laws on the books. And if you're using algorithms or machine learning to be defrauding people or engaging in collusion or other illegal conduct, that's not treated differently just because it's being done with an algorithm.
A question from me. I mean, inevitably, you're now reaching the end of your term, and you've been doing a huge, phenomenal amount of work just in the last few weeks to get things out of the door, a remarkable record of things which have been accomplished. But as you look back, I mean, this is an obvious question. I'm sure that there is a lot that you would have, of course, kind of pursued going forward? What are the priorities that in your mind, I think you once told me you had sort of almost two files in your head. This is if we win the election, this is what if we lose, and what am I going to pursue, and what am I going to do in this situation and this other situation. But what is the most pressing area or set of areas that you wish you had the time to pursue at this point?
So you're right that, yeah, starting last summer, I kind of came up with two lists depending on whether we had 6 months left or several years left. Look, I think especially given the progress we've made on the merger enforcement front, continuing to find opportunities to, establish the codification and acceptance of the merger guidelines is something that will continue to be important, though I've been really thrilled to see that just in under a year, we've had, over a dozen courts cite the merger guidelines as persuasive authority. I think more generally, we've really made a lot of advances in examining this issue of roll-ups, both in the private equity context, but more generally. We filed last September the FTC's first ever suit targeting one of these serial acquisitions, the monopolization of anesthesiology providers in various markets in Texas. We defeated a motion to dismiss against one of the entities and recently just settled and got the private equity owner under order at the FTC that will give us much more visibility into future transactions. But last year at some point we had opened up a docket asking the public to tell us where else might these serial acquisition and roll-up strategies have occurred. And we got an enormous amount of feedback. I was just reading about potential roll-ups that may have implicated, firefighters and the ability to be responding to major fires in California. And so the stakes here are high, and I would hope that the kind of focus on roll-ups in particular will continue. Healthcare is a general matter. We have some major conduct lawsuits underway, a major enforcement action addressing some of the rebating practices by the 3 PBMs. That's going to be an incredibly important enforcement action that could determine what the future of some of these markets look like. But I think across a lot of these dimensions, healthcare, housing, food, labor markets, I think we've established a good foundation, but there really is so much more to do.
You want the last question?
Yeah. Obviously Trump, we're dealing with Trump 2.0 now. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what you're actually optimistic about in terms of your legacy that will continue, and then, if we have time, what you're worried about.
That was going to be my question too, so there you go.
I do think that over the last few years, there's really been such a profound change in public understanding about what it is that antitrust enforcers actually do and how it affects people's day-to-day lives. And so the kind of public accountability mechanisms that should exist, I think the muscle for that is much more there. And so if there was a total retreat or a total kind of effort to turn back the clock, I do think we would see some real reaction there. I think more generally, now that some of these litigations have already resulted in court decisions that have shown courts accepting the interpretations that we have put forward, be it on the merger front or the conduct front. We used to hear an argument that, these are radical theories, and if you put them forward in court, you're going to get tossed out. We now actually have a whole set of legal opinions accepting and embracing these theories. And so we know in the future, if there is effort to ignore those areas of the law, it's going to be a willful decision, not one that is actually anchored in what the law says. I think in terms of worries, I've shared this publicly. I do think that there is a real interest, especially among some of the companies that are defendants in FTC actions, to probably come and see if they can get some type of sweetheart deal. We have some major trials set for this year and next year. And so I would hope that we would see those through and be able to get liability findings rather than, see some cheap settlements.
Last question. Do you have any more? I think that we've overstayed our welcome because you told us we had about 20 minutes. We are very, very, very grateful, Lina, for you making the time. And, you know, again, I don't know if you heard it at the beginning, there is considerable fan base for you here in Europe. I think that what you've achieved has been watched with enormous admiration and affection here. So I would like the room to join me in celebrating your record and thanking you for your service.
Thank you, Lina.
Thank you, Lina.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Oh, okay. Me again. No, we're done. You can go. There is champagne. Go. It's over there. Have a drink.